And the survey showed that, in fact, the true statistic was for boys, 3%, for girls, 2%. Now, actually putting those kind of statistics before parents together, not in a blame sense, but actually to say, look, the honest reality with all of us with busy lives is that we do have to think more carefully about what our children are up to. Think about the sedentary activity that they're engaged in. Think of the amount of time they're stuck in front of computers and TVs and the rest. And try to actually help them to change their lives for their better future. And I think doing that is a long process. And the one thing I sincerely hope is that as part of the economic cuts we're having, that many of those good initiatives, like MEND and many others in this room and represented elsewhere, don't disappear down the plug hole on the grounds that short-term economic savings are better than long-term health.
Okay, Phil, that's a good point. I think we'll probably move on to the next question, if that's all right. Let's keep the questions coming. There was a lady with the hand here, and then who else was there? Something right at the back. Yeah.
I'm actually going to squeeze in two questions, if that's okay. The first question is, one of the items on your sort of agenda for this panel debate was about health inequalities. And one thing that has surprised me so far in the conference is that we've discussed how countries with bigger inequalities, social and economic inequalities, have also bigger inequalities of health. What nobody's mentioned is the data that countries that have bigger and socioeconomic inequalities actually have worse health at every single socioeconomic stratum, even the very top ones that are much more richer than maybe in other countries, than in the same socioeconomic strata in countries that are much more equal. So it seems that social economic equality per se is bad for everybody's health, not just poor people's health. I wondered what people think about that, because it would give very clear argument for just reducing inequality. The second question was about the nagging and the nudging. So it seems that a third option of changing things is not to nudge people and not to nag them, but to radically change the design, the background design in which we live. Yeah. So we all realize that a lot of our ill health just has to do with the design of the environment about it. For example, I'm thwarted every single morning in my choice to try and cycle to work in a non-death-defying way. That is pretty much impossible. And given the present design, it's really hard to say make cycle lanes, right? But if you'd gone back 50 years and you might have looked forward, you might have just, reduced cars in London massively and made lots of cycle lanes. Should we just go in there and just do that? Say, kick 60% of cars out of London, convert 50% of road to cycle lanes. Okay, bad for economy, good for pollution, good for health, and things down the road will follow. Those are my two questions.
That's fine. Okay. I mean, on the design thing, I think this Barbican site is beautifully designed. It's designed to really make you walk, because you have to walk for about an hour and a half to find the place. It's great. It's brilliant. Okay. Now the question on the spirit level, the equal society. I think that's probably one for Bobby to kick off with. Let's have that one.
You'd expect me to have a lot to say about your first point. It's not really a question, is it? It's a sort of, probably in this audience, an underlying agreed statement that inequality is the cause of most of the issues that we've been talking about today, and it is why the physical activity programs are targeted at the red areas on the Gloucester map, and it's why we try from our different positions to reduce those inequalities. And the inequalities do exist at every step. They exist in the middle of the socioeconomic distribution, right across from the poorest to the other end of the distribution. I think it's probably fair to say that we haven't heard much in terms of radical reform that would address those inequalities, and that's one of the debates that we need to keep warm. The second thing that I would say goes back to your cycling examples, a really good one, because actually it's not just the environment, and it's not just the commitment of whether it's local government or national government or what have you. It is that if you're a cyclist in London, you have to have the courage that comes from Hercules to actually cycle along with these men who ride their 6-foot bikes, drive across the red traffic lights, and so forth. So there's something cultural about every aspect of health that's really important, that I didn't think I'd be saying this from where I sit, but that doesn't relate to the traditional evidence base. And I had been wanting to say, because I don't think it's widely known, and in the days of yore when I worked solely in the smoking and health field, it was a long time ago, and our sole campaign in ASH in those days was to get a ban on tobacco promotion. And the evidence, the economic evidence, always has holes in it. And so one day we had a conversation with the Secretary of State for Health in Norway, which was the first country that legislated to ban tobacco promotion and did all kinds of other things that took us decades to do in the UK. And we said, how did you do it? How did you convince the rest of government on the lack of evidence? And he said, my dear, it's an ethical position. You have to take an ethical position. If there is any remote risk that our children might be exposed, then we must do something about it. So my question really would be, why have we, where we are, got this attitude to health protection and environmental hazards that we haven't got for the rest of public health, that we can't expose some people to salmonella outbreaks because we want them to choose which foods they eat? That is completely unacceptable to every political party and every member of public. Why have we... there's something about our culture that we need to shift.
Okay. Now, Andrew Lansley, Secretary of State, talks a lot about reducing health inequalities and puts it right up there at the top of the agenda amongst the main things. But, of course, the real Secretary of State for Health is George Osborne, which is a cheery thought, because it's really down to George Osborne, to put in the sorts of fiscal policies that would take us much more towards a flatter society in the sort of a spirit level sense of the word. And just on the business of cycling in London, I cycle quite a lot in London, and I particularly find it a bit the worst moment. So when I've got a bus right behind me, not because I'm frightened of the bus, but as I'm approaching a bus stop, everyone puts their hands out and they all slap me round the head. Anyway, silly point. John.
Come and work in Devon. Everybody's wonderfully courteous there. I just think Bobby's made quite a very important point there, that when you look at the sort of all the statistics that we know, that within them there are pockets which don't quite fit. And actually, one of the great enemies of good health for a certain group of people is their affluence. Now they're a small group. And the other interesting thing, which is, again, which I think is, as you rightly say, is a cultural thing, that being healthy and fit for some people it seems to release a level of aggression, which is enormously intimidating for other people. Mm-hmm. And particularly if you try to exercise in a public space. I only just last week was subject of an absolute tirade of verbal abuse by a cyclist, because I live in the country and I'm just not used to people swinging around corners at high speed, swathed in lycra and, a cycle helmet. And it was just terrifying.